Hi. Okay. I think we
I'll just,
prepared a few slides. So I don't know if you can see my screen.
yeah, we can see it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm going to.
So I know we've got an hour for the presentation. So I think we will present very briefly who Carbon4 Finance is, and then a few minutes on the methodology and how we collect the data and who we are. And then we wanted to make it useful and interactive. So feel free to ask any questions along the way. We prepared a case study as well, so that there will be a presentation of investment portfolio so that you can see what's the application of the database we've got. And after, I think we can keep 10 to 15 minutes for any remaining questions. But feel free to ask any question anytime you want. So I'm Marianne Vincent, the CEO of Carbon4 Finance. I'm with Melissa.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm a business lead development, and I joined recently Carbon4 Finance.
So in a few words, who we are. So Carbon4 Finance is a French fintech. We're part of a group Carbon4, which an expert in the climate, carbon footprint, etc. So the group was created in 2007. We worked with the corporates for more than 15 years now, and we do some carbon footprints, and we help the corporates to change their business model and to adapt themselves to the climate transition. So the Carbon4 Finance, the data provider entity, was created in 2016 to help the financial sector to have more accurate data to take investment decisions. And now we've got 3 offers, one on transition risk, carbon impact analytics. What the transition risk is the financial risk to adapt your business to the climate transition. So for example, there's going to be some taxes on, I don't know, diesel cars coming up in the next 10 years. You've got some reputation risk of not to keep selling some products that are not good for the planet, etc., etc. So that's the transition risk. There's another database called CRIS, Climate Risk Impact Screening, that's useful to assess the vulnerability of your portfolio towards climate hazards. I'm exposed to drought, sea level rise, extreme rainfalls, etc., etc. So that's the type of climate hazards we can assess of your portfolio. And then we've got a brand new database this summer called Biodiversity Impact Analytics. So we will measure the biodiversity footprint of your portfolio with a new indicator. So that's basically what we do. We're climate experts and now biodiversity experts. We are differentiating ourselves with some other ESG data provider who are just like tech companies who do some data scraping and collect data everywhere in the reports, but they don't have the expertise. And what we do is to provide support to our customers so that they can explain the climate strategy of their portfolio and to engage a dialogue with the companies they finance. So our clients, they are asset manager, pension funds, asset owners. We work with index providers as well. We can do listed assets and unlisted assets like private equity, infrastructure, or real estate. So we have now clients outside of France. The business model is to be international. But we only based in Paris. But we've got some US clients now since last year. We've got some more and more US clients on biodiversity and climate. As I said, we cover listed and unlisted assets on all methodologies. I think I will let Melissa present a bit the methodology and introduce the indicators so that when we do the case study, it will be easier for you to understand the principles.
Thank you, Marianne. Fortunately, it's a bit earlier for you, so I guess it will be easier to follow up. I think, as Marianne has said, we are not only a fintech, but we are really climate specialists. So for you to understand the big difference between us and some of our, let's say, peers or competitors, what they can do usually is, if you want to know what is the impact of a company on the climate with how much ton of CO2 they have as an impact, a lot of data providers do only a statistical approach. So they say, okay, this is an automobile company. They have X million of euros of revenue. So their scope 1, 2, and 3 should be this amount of CO2. This is a way of doing it, but this is very imprecise. So what we are doing in carbon impact analytics is a bottom-up approach. So instead of coming from financial information to ecological or environmental imprint, we come back to physical data. So what we will do for automobile company, for example, we will look how much hybrid car, how much diesel car, how much electrical car is constructed and sold. And we will apply emission factors. I guess you know what it is as you are in this kind of seminar, but you come from physical data to ton of CO2. And this is what we will do for all the company we are covering. So we go back to physical data, we apply emission factor, and we end up with environmental footprint. And we have that for scope 1, for scope 2, and for scope 3. And when I was speaking about this seminar to Omar before coming here, I was saying that the biggest difference that we have also between, let's say, Europe and the US is about the debate of scope 3. And we are a big leader in that field. Our purpose, and also the reason why we are doing this call, is really to explain why this is very important to take into account the scope 3. So as you know, when you do carbon accounting, you have three scopes of emission. The 1 and 2 is the company's activities, and the scope 3 is the upstream activities and the downstream activities. And the reason why it's very important is because for the majority of the industry, the scope 3 is bigger than 70 or 80%. So if you are oil and gas company and you take only the scope 1 and 2, it doesn't mean anything. You will have only 10% or 15% of your imprint. And unfortunately, in the data provider and also in the financial sector, it's a kind of a fight to have everyone, especially in the US, looking at the scope 3. And in Carbon4 Finance, we really want to explain why it is important, why you need to correctly measure it. And the reason why we are also doing the bottom-up approach is because a lot of companies are not declaring, publishing the scope 3 emission. So the problem is that if you only do data scraping in annual report of the company, you will only have the scope 1 and 2 and do a poor proxy of the scope 3. And us, we have the capability to actually calculate the scope 3 as what can do a consulting firm. And this is really why we think everyone should do it. But for the moment, not a lot of people are doing it on the market.
If I can do an aparté, I don't know how comfortable you are with carbon accounting, but for example, if I am a car manufacturer, I'm General Motors, the scope 1 is my factory. The scope 2 is the electricity I need to make my factory work. The scope 3 upstream is my suppliers, all the pieces I need to build my car. And the scope 3 downstream is the product itself. So it's the car. So if we think about risk assessments, besides just climate risk, but physical, financial risk assessments, if I have and do the assessment of the risk of my portfolio and I'm missing the scope 3, I missed all the interdependencies of the sectors. For example, we can see with the COVID crisis that there has been some breach between all the supplier chain. And if I can't get my pieces to build my car to my factory, my business is dead. And if I can't sell my cars to my customers because I can't bring the cars to the customers, the business model is dead as well. So we can see that the interdependencies between the suppliers, the manufacturer, and the product is very important. And that's why the climate risk is not an utopia. So now we can see that it's real and it's coming up. And when we talk about including the scope 3 in the climate risk assessment is very important as well for the financial performance. Because if we think that, I don't know, but I heard that in California in 2030, you won't get any diesel cars. You can't sell any diesel cars. In Europe, it will be the same. And if I'm a car manufacturer only selling huge pickups using diesel, we'll have a huge problem because in 10 years, my business is dead. So I need to adapt myself to a low carbon world. I need to start shifting my my production centers to building diesel cars to building, I don't know, electric cars or hybrid cars. So I need to rethink my business model. And that's why we're going to engage with the financial sector to take that into account, because otherwise the financial performance of my portfolio will be affected as well. Because these kind of companies that are still not compatible with the low carbon world, their performance will drop, their market capitalization will drop. We can see with Exxon that they had a lawsuit a few months ago, and the financials, and they had some credit rating downgrade, etc. So this is important as well in terms of financial performance. So the Scope 3 is key to understand what's going on. I just add another slide because we answer the SEC consultation about climate indicators, and we did this analysis of the S&P 500. So you can see in the red bubbles the Scope 3, and in blue bubbles the Scope 1 and 2. In most of the sectors, the Scope 3 is where most of the risk is coming from. And that's why if you miss that and you're only reporting the Scope 1 and 2, you don't understand what you're talking about. So that wasn't about it.
Just to see a bit what were your knowledge on that topic, can everyone raise the hand if they already heard about Scope 3? Some people. Okay. So for the rest, it's quite new. Okay, interesting. Thank you. Make it interactive, even if we're not at all in the same place. So the third and the fourth bullet points are also very important pillar on our methodology. So we look at the emission induced by a company, but what is really, really important as well is to look how much emission saving can be also retributed to this company. And with emission saving, there are actually two pillars. The first one will be the reduction of the emission. So we will compare actually 5 years ago the performance of the company with today. So let's say that a company have succeeded to reduce by, for example, 40% their induced emission. It proves that they are in the good transition, the good transition path. And that is also important to take into account. And the second one is the avoided emission. So we will compare the company to a reference scenario and look how much, thanks to the technology, thanks to a specific business model, maybe, they are better compared to their sector. So for example, if we look at an insulation company who is going maybe to isolate a certain building, maybe the building you are in is not very heated. Thanks to this isolation, you will not use energy to heat the building, and hence it will avoid new emission. So these two pillars are really making if you add them up for the emission saving, it shows who are the actors of the transition. And the funds we are working with and the asset manager, we always advise them not only to look at the emission induced, but also at the emission saving. Because within the same sector, if we come back to what other companies are doing in this field, if you only look for a certain sector, the size and the sector of activity, you will not be able to say, okay, between company A and company B, who is actually the best, which one has actually done a part of the work, and which one is actually performing better compared to their peers. So it's very important to have this part, because also we cannot afford to have a world without the energy sector, without the industrial sector. It's too easy to say, okay, we will invest only in a low carbon industry, because actually to be, I don't know, to do your study, some people have built this building. So there is infrastructure, there is also energy needed. Maybe some of you came with their car, even if it's not good, you should take your bicycle. But all of this industry are necessary for the world of tomorrow. So this emission saving is really the pillar to look at the best actors. I don't know, Marianne, if you want to complete.
Yes, it's just to give another example. We take like the same automotive sector, but sometimes you know, or you have a sense that I don't know, Tesla building electric cars will have a greater impact on climate. So you know that, but you can't quantify how much better Tesla is compared to, I will take General Motors again, but I'm sure there are even more emissive cars. But we will have to quantify that because we've got this reference scenario and we say which company already doing better, which company already engaged in the transition, and which company already using some low carbon solution like electric cars, or there are some, you know, even in the oil and gas sectors, you can find some actors already rebalancing their mix between oil and gas, or investing in biofuel or biomass, etc. So you can find some actors reinventing themselves. And because we looked at exactly what the company is producing, we can see which solution they're using, and we can say which company already have invested in the innovation technology to save the planet. So that's something very interesting, for example, for an asset manager, if they want to do some stock picking, they will be able to quantify how much better the company is, and that will be the companies who will be performing in the near future because they already made the investments to be compatible with the low carbon world.
I don't know if we have the slide with the comparison with company A and company B. So for all the people who did not raise their hand when I was speaking, we were speaking about the scope 3, it's a bit of your version on the left side. And now we are all, thankfully, on the right side of the slide, meaning that if you only look at the scope 1 and the scope 2, if you compare a company maybe on oil and gas and the installation manufacturer, the two examples we are taking here, you could think that the company A has a less impact on the environment compared to company B. When you take the scope 3, you actually see that the sum of scope 1, 2, and 3 is bigger for company A compared to company B. And when you look at the emission saving, you can see now that if you want to invest within the same sector or between two sectors in a company who is actually helping for the transition, you should more look at the company B. We are speaking about the financial sector, but if you end up in a company, maybe the ESG department, you should also push to have this kind of data published and analyzed by the company. Or if you work on the strategy of a certain company, to always ask to have this scope 3 to take the right decision when you will be in your future work. And the last pillar we have is the forward-looking rating. So as we said before, we were looking at the past performance, the current performance, but also there is a lot of announcement now. Everyone is saying we are net zero, or we are going to reduce by 90% everything in France. I think yesterday we heard that all airplanes are going to be net zero. We don't know how, but somehow apparently they want to do it. So the point here is to have really a critical view on what is announced by the company in terms of reduction targets of scope 1, 2, and of scope 3. Unfortunately, certain times they didn't even publish a reduction target for scope 3. And when the strategy is published, what we do is we compare what the company is saying, what is possible for the sector, and what they already have done. If everything is aligned, they get the best score. If it's not aligned, they get from 1 to 4, from it's really not feasible and they are not really serious to they are really serious and they are aligned with what we should have in the future. And this part, usually, it's really the qualitative part on our database. If a certain person wants to do engagement, by engagement, we mean speaking with the company and trying to push them in the right direction, they can really look at this part and think, okay, actually, they should maybe publish a scope 3 reduction. Or actually, in the analysis, they said that the scope 3 was not enough ambitious. Or they said something, but it's not really aligned with their transition path. And it's really to help the impact of the financial sector that we are including this forward-looking rating. So if we have all of these pillars, so the past performance 5 years ago, the current performance today, and the future performance with the qualitative rating, we put all of that together with certain weights for each sector. And we have an overall rating, which is used by all of our clients, even if we always say that if they want more detail, they can also ask to have the reasoning and the logic behind this number or this letter. So when we have all of this rating, what we do is we take all of this rating and we do a rating of a portfolio. So let's say someone have a fund of 200 company and 100 sovereigns. They invested both in companies and in debts of states. We will put all of that together and have an overall rating of the portfolio. And we will translate this rating to a temperature. So I guess you all know that the target is 1.5. And if we don't succeed really to stay below 2 degrees, so the target of the financial world is really to be below this 2-degree target. And the idea is to test each time they change their investment to see if or not their portfolio will be aligned with the Paris Agreement.
Yes. So we took as an example a portfolio of a client. So I think the application of our database would be, for example, for an asset manager who want to build a thematic fund or an investment portfolio with equities. This one is an equity fund. And I want to know in which sectors I need to invest or which company I need to select to have an investment portfolio aligned with the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement was set up by the international community in the COP21 in 2015, when they say that we should restrict the rise of the temperature by the end of the century to 2 degrees, even 1.5 degrees to survive, or to keep a good life. So this methodology helps to measure the temperature of your portfolio, to measure which world you finance with your investments. So first of all, we try to understand the portfolio to see where the investments are coming from, in which sectors the fund is invested in. And here we can see that there's a lot of investment in the ICT sector. We can see that a lot now. There's a lot of ICT or healthcare and pharmaceuticals sectors in the portfolios because of the GAFA. And I think there's something about the COVID where Sanofi and everyone is invested in this kind of companies. And after we apply all the indicators we presented. So you can see here that for the scope 1 and 2, it's just a small portion compared to the scope 3 induced emission of your portfolio. And if you don't calculate that, you say, okay, I'm just 3,000 tons of CO2 of my portfolio, but you missed almost 10 times what's the real size of emissions of your portfolio. And then you can that in absolute terms. We can calculate that as well in intensity. So by the ton of CO2 per million euros invested. So you can see that for the portfolio here, it's 300 million euros invested. What's exactly the portion allocated to your investments? We can do that for induced emission and for emission savings as well. So you can see that the companies selected in this portfolio are quite good as well, because they allow to save almost 7,500 tons of CO2. Here is the distribution of letters. So Melissa told you that we've got this overall rating with a range of between A+ to E-. A+ being a company with a very positive impact on the climate. E-, I'm coal extraction and I'm around 6 degrees temperature, so not compatible with the low carbon world. We can see that there's a lot of distribution around the C. So they're mostly investing in systemic sectors, so not good but not bad for the climate. They had some good selection of companies rated B+ or B-, but they still have some companies they need to either to lower their investments or they have to engage a dialogue with the companies to help them to transition themselves towards more investment in low carbon solution. Here on the top right, you can see that the portfolio is aligned with a 2.8 degrees Celsius temperature. So the objective of the Paris alignment is to be below 2 degrees. So there's still some work to do. But here you will see the most contributors. But as a benchmark, we took the MSCI World, and we consider that the MSCI World is aligned with the business as usual scenario of the IPCC, saying that we will be between 3 and 4 degrees by the end of the century. So that's our benchmark to one of the points of our S-curve. So the portfolio is better than the benchmark, but still not aligned with the Paris Agreement. And we can see that the overall rating of the portfolio is around 8 out of 15. The MSCI World is 8.7 out of 15. And we can try to explain why. That's the whole point of the analysis, is try to understand your portfolio. And you can see that you have some good companies here in green, like the main contributor to the emission savings, which company allowed to save some emissions. So we've got International Paper, Volkswagen, Siemens. And the size of the bubble is the emission in intensity. And the color of the bubble, the size of a bubble is the emission in absolute terms, and the color is in intensity. So for example, here, you've got this very small red, green dot, dark green. It's for Austria office, which is a very good company in terms of climate performance. But the investment in the portfolio, meaning that at very low weight in my portfolio, which is a shame because it's a good company. And if I have invested more in that company, that will help to have more emission savings. Here is the worst companies in your portfolio, the one with the more induced emission. You can see that Siemens, you've got a lot of absolute emission, and it's in dark blue, meaning that it's a very big line, a lot of investments on that company within the portfolio. So you can try to tell a story saying, okay, if I decrease the investment in Siemens and I try to increase in Austria office, I will have, or General Electric, for example, or International Paper, I will have a lower temperature of my portfolio. We can compare the portfolio with a benchmark. So here you can see the scope 1, 2, and 3 for the portfolio and for the benchmark. The negative number is for the emission savings, the positive number is for the induced emission. And you can see that the portfolio of my clients is better because they've got more emission savings and they've got lower induced emission, scope 1 and 2 and 3. In terms of allocation between the portfolio and the benchmark, you can see that, for example, in terms of industrials, the portfolio is invested at 12% in the industrial sector compared to the benchmark, which is 15%. But in terms of emission, I've got even less emission in intensity compared to the portfolio, meaning that even within this sector, I made the good choice of a company, like the best class strategy, because even if I follow the benchmark, I made the right decision in terms of investments, picking that company compared to another one. I don't know if this kind of analysis talked to you. There are not many questions. I hope it's clear.
Yeah, it's just because usually we wait for the end before asking questions. But yeah, well, thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah, it was amazing. I really liked it. And now we're gonna try to go over questions. So yeah, I tried to do something on my computer, so they should hear you from your spot. So you can just stand up and try to ask your question. If anyone has a question. Okay, I have a question. Yeah, I wanted to know how you get your data. Like, are the companies sending it to you, or are you like, how do you do it?
It's only public information. So the source is either the annual reports or extra financial reports or like company presentation to the market or investor relations, etc. But it's only public information. So we don't collect information directly to the company except for unlisted assets because there's no public information on unlisted assets. But for all the like equities or corporate bonds or sovereign bonds or green bonds assessments, we got information from directly from the annual report.
Okay, awesome.
And we can find the information because they always report what they do. As Melissa said, we collect operational data. So they need to report to their stakeholders what's their production, where the revenues are coming from, etc. So this type of information is useful for us. And scope 1 and 2, we can find the numbers in the report, but scope 3, upstream and downstream, is not available, but it doesn't matter because we will recalculate all this emission based on the annual report and productivity data.
Yeah, there's a question.
Yeah, sure. Should I just stand up?
Yeah, I mean, you can try it.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was wondering how you address scope 3 emissions that might overlap with scope 1 emissions of another company. So, for example, you had on a slide like upstream freight. So that might be like scope 3 for an automotive maker, but it might be scope 1 for the shipping company. So do you have to differentiate that, or is that at all like, make sure you're not double counting emissions?
Yeah, it's my fault. I deleted the slide because
Good question.
Yeah, so we report the full value chain at issuer level so that you've got a full assessment at company level. But of course, when you aggregate all the emission at portfolio level, you will have some double counting or even triple counting because you've got the scope 3 with the suppliers and the product and the company itself. So what we do is we think about one word. So if you've got like all the energy produced, it will be one planet. If you have like all the industry using this electricity to work, it will be another planet. If you have like all the products, so between the energy producer, energy user, and all the manufacturer, like the industries, there will be 3 times the emission of a word. So we decided to make something simple, like we divide all the emission by 3 at portfolio level. At the beginning, we had something very complex with, depending on the allocation of your portfolio, we will do some like very complex retreatment, but it was very difficult for our clients to use that. So we simplified that, and now we divide the emission by 3. And then, for example, if you've got a fixed income portfolio, when you've got some corporate bonds and sovereign bonds, you will have some double counting as well, because in the sovereign emission, you're already counting all the activity of the companies in the country. So we looked at the world GDP and say how much the countries, the states, or like regions and collectivities contribute to the world GDP, and how much the companies, like the private sectors, contribute to the world GDP. So it's 72% for the private world and 28% for the like public institutions. So we have this ratio of 72% for corporates and 28% for sovereign. And if you've got this fixed income portfolio, we will reallocate the emission like that. So we will have 2 pockets, one for the sovereign bonds, one for the corporate bonds, and we'll take that emission, we apply the 72%, the 28%, and altogether you will have your portfolio emission. So there's several points of retreatment of double and triple and more than that counting.
I guess, like, how do you assess what these companies can actually impact? Because it's interesting to say that, like, a financial institution has a ton of scope 3 emissions, which I think is shown on some of your slides. And it seems to me, just by looking at that, you're assigning a burden to a bank for something that they can't actually control, and most likely because they're financing a lot of probably like oil and gas companies. So it's just, I'm trying to like figure out how, like, what is JP Morgan supposed to do about Exxon's carbon footprint?
So maybe I will take that one. Yes, you have seen probably the slide where we were showing the different bubble, and for the financial sector, or even at the end, you can see that for financial, we account in the scope 3 what we call the emission financed. So we think that every actor has a role in the world, and the bank has also a role in choosing the actor they finance and how much they finance it. So we develop a specific methodology for banks, and we look at all the sector they finance, and we retribute part of the emission of this sector in the scope 3. And this is the reason why this is present in this presentation. And it's true that today the economy is what it is. So it means that if you are a global bank, probably you will have to finance a bit of everything, including oil and gas. But it doesn't mean that they should not try their best not to do it, or to maybe exit quicker the coal industry, for example, or to do as much as possible effort to go out of the oil and gas industry when they are not transitioning. So it's true that the world is what it is. It's true that the bank needs to finance what they can finance, but it's also true that they have a choice and they have a role to play, a limited role maybe, or a big role, it depends, as you can see, what you think, but they still have the role to play. And for the anecdote, aparté, as Marianne would say, in France, we worked with an NGO called Oxfam, and I think it's international, so maybe you heard about it in the US as well. And the idea was to assess French bank and their impact in the financial sector. And what we saw after the publication of this paper is that a lot of banks indeed reacted saying it's not true, or yes, but we do what we can, etc., etc. But actually, and Marianne can maybe explain a bit more, it had an impact on what the bank are actually doing this year, 1 year after the first report.
Yeah, but to complete on, after this publication, there was a reaction as well on the French government, who asked the banking sector to take like more courageous engagements to exit the coal industry. So there was already planned for 2030, but they asked the banks to engage as well to exit the fossil energy because there's no commitment as such already written by the banks. I think in terms of investments, you can have two strategies. Either you choose the exclusion, so I'm only investing in renewable energies, etc. But you can have this solution if you have an asset manager and you have a very like restricted funds when you have 50 lines in your portfolio and you choose to have a thematic fund. But if you are a large asset manager or a pension fund or a bank and you want to have like a diversified portfolio, you can choose to finance the transition and to finance all sectors. What we say is we give the tools to the financial sector to assess what the company do. That's why we've got this bottom-up approach to give and assess quantitative indicators and qualitative indicators saying this company is within an emissive sectors like automotive, industrials, fossil fuel sectors, etc. But I can see that this company is making an effort to finance the transition. They are already trying to invest in, I don't know, hydrogen solution. We can see that they have very ambitious reduction targets, etc. So that will help the financing sector to choose the company to finance all the economy, but to choose the companies already engage in the transition, and the one who doesn't want to change, they won't have any financing anymore. And if you talk about, I'm JP Morgan, what do I do with Exxon? Well, Exxon is a very bad student, for example, in the oil and gas sector, because they haven't set up any scope 3 reduction compared to, I don't know, Total or some other oil and gas actors. They already know that the scope 3 is key, and they have been asked by the regulators to set up some scope 3 reduction. And Exxon said publicly that there was no climate issue, and we will be fine in 50 years. So I think, for example, Exxon is not a good example. But what we recommend is using the data and using the dialogue you can have with the corporates is to vote. BlackRock, for example, they say they're huge climate actors, but they miss a few I say that in English, but there are some directives in the board meeting of all these companies where you can vote as shareholders, and that's how the financial sector can have some action. Because BlackRock is a huge investor of these companies, so they can have a say. If we can see smaller actors in Europe when they try to gather together to have enough percentage of votes to have some impact in these board meetings. So that's how the financial sector can have an impact and a dialogue with the corporates.
So effectively what you're saying is you're going to raise the cost of capital for this, like reports like this would effectively raise the cost of capital for polluting companies that don't have metrics around scope 1 through 3, or you're trying to disincentivize financing for them.
I think it's, if you don't have a scope 1, 2, and 3, I think it can be a fiduciary risk as well, because as a financial actor, you don't tell the truth to your final investors. You say, no, that's fine. I made all the financial assessments. This corporate is credit worthy. Okay, I did the financial check. And in terms of climate and all the things coming up, it's fine. I can report the scope 1 and 2, which is not a climate risk assessment, because the scope 3 is going to be key, because all the transition risks are coming from the scope 3. So in terms of what you say to your final investors, you're mixing all the points, saying, I can see that the financials are good, but we can see that with the COVID, we have a drop of 10% in your GDP. With 1 or 2 degrees increase, it will be way worse than that. And you can't expect because we haven't seen that in the past. So you can't modelize what's coming up in terms of financial impacts. And if you don't start reporting the full climate risk, in terms of financial investor, it's your responsibility to take all the risk into account: the financial risk, the market risk, the credit risk, the counterparty risk, and the climate risk.
Okay, do we have a last question? Yeah, I think it was all. Once again, thank you a lot for coming. Thank you for being here this late. Can we have a and yeah, thank you a lot for this great presentation. I'm just gonna stop the recording.